Murder and Such contains stories about murders, the macabre, true crime, serial killers, and other dark subject matter. This includes adult themes, language, descriptions of gore, violence, and other information provided by news articles, witness testimony, and public record. Murder and Such is not intended for all audiences, and although warnings will be set in place, listener discretion is still advised.
And welcome back to Murder and Such. My name is Hunter, and who the hell are you?
Hi, I'm Erin R. Ryan. I am an actor here in Dayton, and
Yes.
I'd like to see what this podcast is all about and being a guest on it. So, because it's pretty interesting, I've heard it.
Absolutely. Well,
but I like dinosaurs and chicken nuggets. And I'm literally wearing a dinosaur suit right now.
She is.
So
No
I'm
joke.
committed.
We'll post it on Instagram.
Oh God. All right.
Yes. Erin and I had decided to watch a documentary after I talked to her about this ghost town, in which is the central talking point of this episode. And since this is actually the first, it's gonna sound weird, but the first 5th episode since Haley decided to leave the show, I thought that maybe it'd be kind of a fun thing to have a little bit more of a kind of lighthearted episode and, bring on a friend. Mm-hmm. So, Erin, I thank you for your input. I thank you for, torturing yourself by listening to this show.
I like to be heard. It's fine.
And watching the documentary with me.
Mm-hmm.
But this is episode 55. But before I get into it, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping, as I do in all of my episodes. I wanted to thank the 2 new patrons that are now on Patreon. So a big thank you to our good friend and longtime listener, Caitlin Johnstone in New Zealand. I hope that you're doing well, and I'm very sorry to hear about your grandfather. And the second person I would like to extend a very loving thank you to is a woman by the name of Miss Erin R. Ryan.
It's me!
For jumping on the Patreon.
Me, suckers! I'm here.
Yep. Erin, thank you for donating to the Patreon.
Of course.
Every single dollar helps. It goes back into the show. It paid for stamps to send. Yesterday I sent stickers to Germany and Australia. So that's cool, and I don't have to eat the cost of that.
Where are my stickers at?
What's that?
Where are my stickers at?
Oh, shit, they're right here. See, here.
Yes.
Stickers.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes. And last, but certainly not least, I want to give a shout out to our friend Hayes Selby D over in the UK. There's your shout out, Hayes. But I thank you guys for listening to both parts 1 and 2 of the Timothy Lambesis part. I got a lot of really good feedback from listeners and friends, essentially just saying that, well, the one thing that a person did say is they could tell that I'm still torn about the situation with Tim. Like, I want to see him succeed, but I don't 100% fully he's gonna be the best fucking person that ever lived. And I don't know. It's hard when it comes to abuse, and if people can forgive their abusers, and if in the public spectacle we can forgive abusers for their atrocities against people. I think it's a very touchy subject, and
does he deserve that platform still?
Right, and I'm still at a loss about that.
I literally don't know what to think about it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's the mental gymnastics I've gone through with that episode, trying to decide if he has been redeemed or he's capable of redemption, is hard, because he tried to fucking have somebody murdered. Mm-hmm. So, again, I said it in the episodes, both of them, if you find yourself in a domestic situation, there's a website that can help you, which is www.thehotline.org, or you can call the number, which is 1-800-799-7233. And if you find yourself in a moment of terror or danger, please call or text 911 in your areas to get immediate help. So I thank you guys for listening to that. It was a lot of research, a lot of work went into that episode series. And if you would like to be, awesome, like Erin and Caitlin R, and you would like to join the Patreon and help fund like the back end of the show and the research costs and all of that, you can visit patreon.com/murderandsuch, or you can visit murderandsuch.com, and you will find the links to make a one-time donation via PayPal, or the link to the Patreon, and links to all the social networking. Yay! But you and I watched a documentary. Mm-hmm. It's something that I kind of told you about. I know I started getting into a little bit of a video game that I wanted to play that was coming out, because you and I had a discussion about, actually the first time that we ever hung out at Tanks, like who some of our favorite directors are. Mm-hmm. And you said one of your favorite directors is?
Guillermo del Toro, of course.
Del Toro, and I will be talking about him in this episode.
Excellent. I'm
just
so
a little
excited.
bit. But Del Toro I'm a big video gamer, and Del Toro is actually in a video game that just came out. As we are recording this, it is currently the 14th of November. This should be out that following Sunday. And Del Toro is actually in a video game. And this video game was kind of the bastard child of a video game that was supposed to happen, but didn't, because the company Konami sucks. So the video game he was supposed to be was a rebooting of the game Silent Hill, which was called Silent Hills. But I'm really fascinated by ghost towns. I'm really fascinated by something that once was, even in maybe not our generation, but even a couple generations behind us.
There's something really creepy about a place that was once so full of life, and you can tell that it was so full of life, and then suddenly it's just desolate.
Yes.
There's something it makes me feel empty to look at something like that, if that makes sense.
Empty because you knew that people once thrived and lived there. Right.
And then I'm looking at it like, oh God, it could be gone in an instant, and nature can just overtake it. And it was like it's weird. It's like a skeleton.
Yeah.
It's like a rotting place that used to be. I don't know. It's very upsetting.
See, the thing that I think of when I think of ghost towns is I think of, like, we have a lot of ghost towns in America. I mean, the one that we're talking about with this episode is Centralia. And then there's one in Missouri where it was supposed to be a suburb of all these really nice, rich houses, and it just went desolate. They never grew. But then smaller people, or smaller, economically lower people moved in. And they had gravel roads. Well, they started... With gravel roads, a lot of people put oil on them to help with all of the dust from the gravel and everything else. And what this guy didn't know was this guy was like taking this oil, and he was like, yeah, I'll remove the oil from this company that works with radiation stuff. And he essentially was spraying oil on this gravel, and it radiated the entire town.
No.
Yes. So I know that a lot of these places, like Detroit, is very unpopulated now compared to what it used to be. I mean, thanks to the economic crash of 2008.
So half my family's from Detroit.
Oh, really?
My mom's side is from Detroit. So every time I go up there with her, which hasn't been in years and years and years, but I mean, she gets a little misty-eyed about it.
Sure.
Because it used to, I mean, she was there in the 50s and 60s, and her father was a cop, my grandfather was, and everything, she just lived in the city, and the city was like thriving, and there's just not a lot there anymore.
Yeah.
It's sad to her.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Almost, when I think of ghost towns, it almost reminds me of we don't live in a post-apocalyptic world, but this could be something that like a post-apocalyptic world might look like.
Sure. Yeah.
Like desolation, emptiness, trying to, like, you look at a building or a bank and you think, like, how many people went through those doors? What kind of people have memories of this place? What's, like, how things used to look back then compared to how they look now?
Right.
And what happened? Is it capitalism? Is it disaster? Is it a coal fire? We don't know.
Ooh.
So what do you say? Do you think we should get into this?
I think we should. I think that was
Okay.
a wonderful intro, and I think I'm ready.
Well, Erin, I thank you for being on this episode with me.
Thank you.
Hopefully I can have you back sometime soon.
Yes, I would love that.
I would love to have you on
already
again
excited.
soon.
We haven't even begun the episode. I'm already like, I want to come back.
Well, my name is Hunter, and this is Erin.
Hi.
And this is episode 55, Centralia, Pennsylvania, Hell on Earth.
What would your neighborhood look like if one day it disappeared? And not just that everyone moved away, but everything in it, the houses, sidewalks, even most of the roads, wiped from the landscape and then overtaken by weeds as if it was never even there. That's what happened to Centralia. The streets used to be lined with stores here and the roads lined with cars on the way to the coal mine. But that coal mine, which had powered Centralia with jobs and opportunity for a century, ultimately turned into the furnace that fueled its demise.
I didn't know that the town was being slowly eaten away. I didn't know that the community was being slowly destroyed. If we want to save this community for our posterity, we've got to do something now to save it.
In this general area, about 20 years ago, was an abandoned strip mine that was being used as a garbage dump. And somehow the dump had caught on fire. How it caught on fire is of no importance anymore. But an exposed coal seam was also ignited. And feeble attempts at that time were made because the fire was not extinguished then, and it's been downhill ever since.
What followed the fire and loss of income was a 20-year nightmare that dramatically changed the complexion of Centralia.
Now, Erin, Centralia, Pennsylvania is a small town, or I should say, it used to be a small town in Pennsylvania, nearly 100 miles of Philadelphia. The town sits in Columbia County, and when I was saying it was a very small town, I mean it's a very small town, because the land area total of the town is roughly a quarter of a square mile. And that's at like 1,467 feet above sea level, so keep that in mind. It's tiny.
Right.
It's a real small town. So the town was first settled in the year 1841 as Bull's Head, Pennsylvania, until 1866 when the town was first incorporated and founded by a man by the name of Jonathan Faust as the town of Centralia. So speaking of Jonathan Faust, you actually, it kind of like got your gears turning a little bit about Faust and specifically Mephistopheles?
Yeah, so I like lit. I was really good with literature when I was in school and stuff, and I still read quite a bit, and so
I don't know what books are.
Good job.
I'm done.
I'll show you some books later. It'll be all right.
Cool. Those things that smell fun.
Yeah. So yeah, when I heard that Jonathan Faust discovered the town of, or the city of Centralia, I was immediately, my mind had a spark, and I was like, oh, like Johann Faust, like Dr. Faustus, the story by Christopher Marlowe and the play. What?
Right.
So my brain went in 12 different directions.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But I was excited about it, and I was wondering if there was some sort of interesting connection between that name and the predicament of the town.
Sure.
It being sort of a hell on earth. Well, the story of Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe has some interesting quotes in it.
Okay.
And a couple of them are these. So Faustus says, come, I think, and he's talking to a demon at this point because he is basically wanting to make a deal with demon and Satan to obtain unlimited knowledge and power, and in exchange for his soul, of course, because that's what you do.
As we do.
So the first quote is, Faustus, come, I think hell's a fable. And then Mephistopheles says, I think so still, until experience change thy mind.
Huh.
So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to go deep into this episode of people having their mind changed as being kind of living above hell, like that will change their mind.
Right. Hell hath no limits, nor is circumscribed in one self-place. For where we are is hell, and where hell is, must we ever be.
Wow.
Yeah, that was my favorite.
That's definitely going to play a part into this.
For sure.
Especially with, I'm going to mention later in this episode about the people who leave Centralia and always find their way back. That's awesome. Look at you go. Hell yeah.
I like to read.
I'm dumb.
I'm better at reading than I am talking.
Oh, stop.
But yeah, no, I heard the name and I was like, that has to be sort of interesting with just the name, and then thinking about, the whole Faustian bargain of being, your soul taken to hell because of
what you want on Earth.
What you want on Earth. And
yeah.
I was like, there's a hellfire beneath this town. Perhaps he made some sort of bargain. But that was, I don't know. It may just be a coincidence, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless.
Absolutely. So. No, it's incredibly interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing that research. That's awesome.
A little bit of research.
No, your little bit of research is more than like I wouldn't even think to look into Faust just based off of a name. But
it's a loose connection that I think is interesting.
It's a loose connection, but it's still a connection. That's the thing about it. It's still a connection. Wow.
I do okay.
You do great. All right. The first name they wanted to give the town was Centerville, but there had already been a Centerville established in 1812 that's about 235 miles northwest of where Centralia was. But again, back in the mid to late 1800s, there wasn't the ability to call or text your local government to see if there's already a town under the same name. I found it kind of odd that Centerville was actually damn near the northwest corner of Pennsylvania, which generally isn't very centrally located amongst the state. But then again, the elevation of Centerville is about 1,308 feet above sea level, so they might have been just a little bit discombobulated.
Perhaps.
Yeah. So in 1793, a man by the name of Robert Morris had purchased a third of the land that would one day become Centralia. But 5 years later, when he filed for bankruptcy, he had to forfeit the land to the Bank of the United States, in which a sea captain by the name of Stephen Girard had purchased the land for nearly $30,000. And that investment would turn into a hefty profit, as he learned that the land that he now owned was actually one of the biggest anthracite coal veins in the area. The thing about anthracite is that it's not typically the kind of coal that you find or hear of very often. Now, anthracite, otherwise known as, quote, hard coal, is a very compressed and concentrated coal that isn't found typically amongst coal miners. It contains roughly 92 to 98% carbon and burns for a very, very long time due to the compression and ignition factor. You can think of that kind of like burning gasoline compared to burning napalm. One burns a lot longer, a lot hotter, and it's said that the ignition point of anthracite is much harder to accomplish due to the density of the rock. The countries in which contain anthracite are primarily China, as well as Russia, South Africa, North Korea, Vietnam, Australia, Canada, the UK, and of course, the United States.
USA.
USA! It's more of a rare type, as when it comes to coal production and mining, anthracite only makes up about 1% of the world's supply. Usually only high-capacity and high-grade equipment use anthracite as a fuel source, yet 75% of the world's supply of anthracite coal is located in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. So at this point, Centralia has itself quite the jackpot when it comes to what kind of industry it would become. A coal mining town in which back in the 1800s, coal was still very much a hot commodity as compared to today, where coal mining companies are filing for bankruptcy protections more often than not, as coal is a dying industry as we utilize more fossil fuels than anything, and we start embracing newer sources of fuel and renewable energy sources such as wind turbines, solar energies, and ethanol gasoline to help weaken our reliance on fossil fuels and coal. So in 1866, under the guise of Jonathan Faust, the borough of Centralia was established. There was much to be admired about the town even way back then. With the discovery of anthracite, people started flocking to the area, considering that the hills were filled with this black coal. Now, although there's not too much to be found with our current time with coal mining, back in the late 1800s, coal mining was very lucrative and a very dangerous expedition. Now, when I say dangerous, I mean very fucking dangerous. Have you heard of much about the dangers that comes with coal mining?
A ton.
A ton.
Yeah.
The metric fuck ton.
like everything you do down there is dangerous.
Yeah, it's just fucking, it's terrible.
The coal is trying to kill you. Like
Everything is
in
trying
the
to kill
mine
you.
is trying to kill you.
You ever played Minecraft?
No.
Yeah. Well,
haven't.
so Minecraft, I'm going to go on a geek moment for a second.
Yay, geeks.
Minecraft, if you dig above you and there's sand, it'll come down and fucking crush you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
But it's real life Minecraft. It's real life Minecraft. So according to the United States Department of Labor, which started collecting data in 1911, there were damn near 900 deaths per year based off of the loose data that they had at the time. But later, in 1931, it was reported that there were a little over 700 deaths per 10,000 miners who worked in the coal mines.
And that's just like the deaths
That's just deaths.
at the time.
Yeah.
What about the years of living with the after effects of working there?
Exactly.
Like that's even more on top of
Fucking,
that.
like black lung?
Black lung, yeah.
Horrible.
It's a terrible death.
Of course, those numbers did drop drastically over time as the government started implementing more strict regulations in place to prevent the loss of life, but it's still considered one of the most dangerous professions that ever were. Anything from tunnels collapsing, explosions, cargo carts crushing workers, and not even including the miners who would spend most of their lives in the shafts, then later develop black lung and other respiratory issues. On December 6th of 1907 in Monaga, West Virginia, was the worst accident in American history. On that day, there were more than 350 men inside of the number 8 and number 6 mines, in which some of them had actually brought with their kids and families into the mines, as safety precautions were pretty loose back in the day.
Oh my God.
At roughly 10:30 in the morning, a massive explosion erupted, causing the tunnels to create a massive fire trench that caused damage to the shafts themselves, collapsing on top of the workers and some of their families who were in there, killing them almost instantly, and caused damage to the surface above to the point where the ventilation systems were blocked off and no fresh air was able to reach the remaining survivors inside of the mines, causing them to suffocate. Considering this was way back in the early 1900s, they said that they couldn't pinpoint the exact reason of why the mines had erupted, but some people who were investigating the scene at the time had stated that they thought a spark might have ignited the methane gas source and then caused a chain reaction which ultimately caused the tragedy. In all, 362 people had perished in the explosion. That's pretty fucking heavy.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people.
That's so many.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God.
So it was after then that the government had established the U.S. Bureau of Mines in 1910 when they were able to keep better tabs on the fatalities and safety measures to ensure that workers were able to do their jobs and hopefully return back to their families. So with the help of the Bureau, fatalities had gone down over time. In Centralia, throughout the course of time, there were many people who had been reported being hurt or possibly killed in the mines trying to acquire the anthracite. And although it was a hard thing to witness one of your coworkers to have an accident, most of the miners would come together to pay their respects and console the families of the workers who died in the coal mines.
Still a lot of pride.
It is.
Yeah.
According to the U.S. Census Bureau, in 1870, the population of Centralia was roughly 1,342 people, which was before they found the coal mines. That continued to grow year over year for a while, where the population had increased by 500 to 1,800 residents, and then hit its highest peak in 1890 with an estimated 2,700 people living and breathing life into this area. Of course, the largest employment opportunity came with the coal mines. The names of the mines weren't numbered, though. The first two that were opened were the Coal Ridge Mine and the Locust Run Mine. Followed later would be the Hazel Dell Colliery Mine, the Continental Mine, and the Centralia Mine. Later, the Lehigh and Mahoney Railroads were constructed to help transport and distribute coal to the eastern Pennsylvania and other areas, making making access to anthracite coal a lot easier for anyone who is looking to obtain it. So with the town growing larger and larger, and with a somewhat booming economy that they found themselves in, considering that coal mining was the main source of employment in Centralia, the town started flourishing. With shops being set up, farmers setting up crops to sell in town, and everything started to come together to what people could see as a full and complete town. However, that doesn't mean there wasn't any sort of controversies in the area. One of the town's founders, by the name of Alexander Rhea, was on a trip on October 17th of 1868, traveling from the Centralia borough to Mount Carmel. Now, there's not a lot that I'm going to go into with this one, but I do believe that when it comes to true crime, this one is pretty noteworthy. So on his trip, he was ambushed by a group known as the Molly Maguires. Now, the Molly Maguires were a 19th century society that primarily struck in Ireland and in Liverpool, but then also some groups had traveled west and settled in different counties in New York, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania, specifically around the counties that surrounded Centralia. They were a fringe activist group among Irish American and Irish coal miners in those counties, and often resorted to extortion and murder as their means of getting what they wanted. Dun dun dun. Well, on December 17th of 1868, they ambushed Alexander Rhea's caravan and murdered him for a large sum of money that they thought he had with him. According to the Columbian and Democrat newspaper that was published on October 23rd of 1868, it stated, "Outrageous murder. Mr. Alexander Rhea of Centralia, one of our best citizens, was foully murdered on last Sunday. The facts as we can gather them are as follows. On Saturday morning last he was driving over to the colliery of the Locust Mountain Coal and Iron Company, of which he was agent. It is supposed for the purpose of finishing the payment of the hands of which he had not been completed the day before. When about a mile from Centralia, it is supposed that he stopped at a watering trough to water his horse, and while doing this, was attacked. 6 bullets penetrated his body, 2 through his left breast, 2 through his neck, and the other 2 through his head. The pistols were evidently held close to his face, as it was considerably burned with powder. The body was then carried 200 yards into the woods and concealed under a bush. About $500 are supposed to have been taken from his body, besides a gold watch. The horse was also led into the woods and tied, but towards night it must have been released or it could not have regained the road. A couple of men, seeing it without a driver, got in and took it to Centralia, whereupon the alarm was given and an immediate search began. The body was not found until Sunday morning. Active efforts are being made to arrest the villains, and it is to be hoped that they will be brought to justice. That such a crime should be perpetuated in broad daylight and within sight of Centralia is a startling fact and should arouse all citizens to attempt to ferret out the criminals. The deceased was a man of unblemished reputation, an active businessman, and universally beloved. He leaves behind a widow and 6 children."
Damn.
Yeah.
Old-timey newspapers be graphic.
Old-timey newspapers be graphic, and that ain't the fucking only one in this episode. Yeah. So it didn't take long for them to find the 4 men, but shortly after they had arrested them, they had let them go up until 8 years later when a man who went by Kelly the Bum had turned himself in to the authorities, but had also implicated the men Patrick Hester, Peter McHugh, and Patrick Tully. It's definitely some Irish names.
Those are highly Irish.
The Irish names.
I mean,
yes.
I'm Erin Ryan, and I'm like, oh, yes, those are my kinsmen. I hear them.
Now, this took the community by surprise as there were nobody to pay for the deaths of Alexander Rhea. After the announcement of the men's connections with the murder, they had them tried and convicted of the murder of Alexander Rhea. Kelly the Bum had avoided the death penalty due to his admission of the crime and helped to get the other 3 men in capture. But after the trial, Patrick Hester, Peter McHugh, and Patrick Tully were all hanged for their crimes. Now, one thing I would like to make note of is how descriptive the hangings were in this publication. Now, I found this article published by the fucking New York Times all the way back on March 26th of 1878. It's kind of lengthy, but I think it's pretty cool actually learning something from some old-timey true crime stuff.
All right, so everybody, sit back and light a black candle. Get ready to be
Just make sure it's
disturbed.
not coal, goddammit.
Nope.
Yeah.
Not for this.
All right. So here's this. Peter McHugh, the smaller of the 3 prisoners, was the first. He was accompanied by Reverend Father Koch of Shamokin, who several years ago was instrumental in having Hester sent to a prison for making a disturbance at a funeral. McHugh was dressed in a shabby suit of black and looked careworn and anxious. He showed no signs of weakness, however, and he carried his large wooden crucifix firmly in both hands. Patrick Hester was the largest and the most intelligent-looking of the men, was next. He was accompanied by Reverend Father McGovern. He wore a handsome black suit and was better dressed in general than either of his companions. The small white plaster crucifix in his hand he carried steadily, and he walked up the gallows steps as he had no concern as to his fate. Patrick Tully was the last to mount the scaffold. He wore a blue coat and vest, and had a pair of jean pantaloons, and he carried a large bronze crucifix. He was also a large man, but smaller than Hester. Reverend Father Schlutter of Danville walked by his side. All of the priests were dressed in long black robes, partially concealed by light white garments reaching below the waist. As the doomed men stood a moment on the platform listening to the last words of the priests, Tully began to tremble slightly, but he soon recovered his self-possession. The men were not pinioned in any way, and Hester reached up with his right hand and coolly rested part of his weight upon one of the upper beams of the gallows. As they raised their heads to listen to the priests, it was first noticeable that none of them wore collars. They looked fit subjects for the gallows. Every one of them was a brutal and dangerous-looking man. Hester, very large and powerful, was more refined in feature than either of the others, but he looked like a man to be avoided on a dark night. The expression on his face was solemn and troubled, but he bore up very bravely. His fat face was marked in many places with large blue scars, a wound with a piece of fresh coal invariably leaving a blue mark. His forehead particularly was spotted with blue. He looked much too large and heavy for the slender rope that dangled beside his head. Tully at the last looked stolid and indifferent. His face was devoid of expression. McHugh looked up a little frightened, but stood up firm and brave. Each of the prisoners bade goodbye to all the priests who handed them their crucifixes for a last kiss. Then McHugh made speech of about a minute's length in a voice so low that even the sheriff, who stood on the platform within a foot of the speaker, could not hear him, and his voice was utterly inaudible off the platform. Hester followed him with a few words in an equally low voice declaring his innocence. Then Tully also, in a very low voice, said a few words on religion and then shook hands with the sheriff. 2 deputy sheriffs handcuffed the prisoners' hands behind them and put 2 heavy black straps around their legs, one above and one other below the knees. While the deputies were at this work, the faces of several women were seen peering eagerly out of one of the lower windows of the jail, and they retrained this eligible position throughout the scene that made many hardy men shrink back in dismay. Another deputy pulled a great white bag over the head of each prisoner, the ropes having been adjusted. Hester and Tully stood upon the eastern trapdoor and McHugh alone on the western. The scaffold was quickly cleared, and before anybody was expecting it, there was a crash. The platform fell, and the 3 men were dangling in the air. Not one of them was instantly killed. Not one of their necks was broken, but all died by strangulation, and at the very nearly same time, in from 11 to 12 minutes after the falling of the drop. The exact time was in doubt for 3 doctors being the timekeepers. There were, of course, 3 opinions on the subject. Tully and McHugh died without a struggle, hanging limp and lifeless. Hester did not struggle, but breathed very hard for some minutes, his huge breast expanded many inches, and his shoulders bending toward each other at the back, wrinkling his close-fitting coat. The crash of the falling platform was distinctly heard outside the jail yard, and the crowd beyond the wall sent up a howl that lasted throughout the dying moments of the prisoners. But the triple tragedy inside was soon to be followed by a violent death outside of the jail walls. More than 50 persons had climbed to the roof of a large coal and wood shed on the eastern side of the yard wall. The roof was not nearly high enough to enable them to see over the wall, but it brought them a little nearer the gallows, and it had its attractions. While the doctors were counting the pulse beats of the rapidly dying men, the shed gave way with a crash, and the crash was followed by a prolonged yell from the crowd. One of the many men and boys on the roof all escaped without serious injury, except a little fellow named Harry Williamson, who was so badly injured that he died a few minutes afterward. It was 11:07 when the drop fell. The rope around Hester's neck kept its position, the knot being behind the left ear, but on both Tully and McHugh, the knot slipped to the back of the neck. The undertaker brought in 3 coffins, and at about 11:30, McHugh was cut down and carried to his coffin. Tully was taken down next, and Hester last, his great weight making it necessary to carry the coffin directly under the rope. The thin but strong cord, about half an inch thick, left a livid mark and deep indentation on all their throats. When the taking down of the bodies was begun, the crowd in the jail yard pressed up closely around the scaffold, hardly leaving the undertaker's men room to do their work. When all was over, a side door in the yard was opened and the public were admitted to see the scaffold and the bodies. Not less than 1,000 persons availed themselves of the opportunity. McHugh and Hester's coffins were at once taken to the railroad depot for transportation to Kingston, thence to Wilkes-Barre, the hearse being followed by several hundred persons. A great crowd met the bodies soon afterward at the Kingston depot.
These fucking ghouls in this town.
Jesus Christ.
They're like, let me see those bodies.
The detail in that, like, I just found that whole piece particularly interesting. Like, we hear stuff like that on Forensic Files or whatever true crime documentary that you may watch, but to have that published in the fucking New York Times back in the day, it gives it a little bit more of an odd feeling.
Yeah, it feels very wrong. Like, not wrong. Wrong is such a strong. It feels very slimy.
Macabre.
Macabre for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's something. That's what I said. I was like, this ghouls. Like, I know that was like entertainment back then, but yikes.
Yeah, if any of you guys listening to that like got off, like fucking call a priest or something. Call your therapist.
It's too late. It's fine.
Yeah.
The wires are already crossed.
Just shooting ropes over that line.
It's fine.
So that wasn't the only murders that were to happen in Centralia. The Molly Maguires were notably responsible for several other murders in the area, but none of which that I could find any definitive information on. They were activists looking to protect their Irish friends and families, and just sometimes looking to make a quick paycheck by robberies, stick-ups, and sometimes, of course, murder. A legend in Centralia is that the first Roman Catholic priest to have settled in the land was a man by the name of Father Daniel Ignatius McDermott, and he cursed the land because of his several run-ins and being assaulted by members of the Molly Maguires in 1869. For some of the murders, more Molly Maguire members were found, convicted, and hanged in 1877 for their crimes, and it said that there were still some of the members and family of the Molly Maguires in the area up until the 1980s, just keeping tabs on things and making sure business was being taken care of. But that's not the reason behind the story that we're telling you. At its peak, the town was booming. It had 7 full-on churches, considering there was a very large religious population, and they even had a post office, 27 different bars and saloons, 5 hotels, 2 theaters, and 14 grocery and general stores.
Ooh.
Centralia was doing pretty goddamn good for once was just a $30,000 transaction. The local economy was doing great, the sense of community was abundant, and everyone was living comfortably. You know, after they took care of some of the Molly Maguire guys. Then some of the mining went down in production in the early 1900s, specifically in 1914. Do you have any idea why that would have happened?
The war?
Exactly. That's it.
I was like, World War One?
Yep, exactly. Because World War I had started on July 28th of 1914, and many of the miners had enlisted due to the selective draft, or by voluntary enlistment.
I read books, I swear.
You do read books. Good job. I was wondering that too. I was doing research. I was like, why the fuck are all these guys taking... Oh yeah, there's a World War I.
Gotta be the war, yeah.
There's a war. We had a whole world war about it. But as miners enlisted, some perished in the war, and families struggled with their loved ones going to war, and the town had still chugged on regardless. And they continued its exploration of anthracite, and even the community still did pretty well, even with the peak population being 2,761 in 1890. After the war was over, the town still had roughly about 2,336 people in it in 1920, even growing a couple hundred more over the next 20 years. However, the war wasn't to blame for the start of a steady decrease in both production and population that was soon to hit the area. Now let me ask, since you read a lot of books,
No.
do you have any idea what could have happened soon thereafter?
When was it?
Post-1914.
Post-1914.
I'll give you a clue.
Okay, good.
15 years later.
Prohibition? No.
No. Close.
Okay. The Depression.
Ah.
I like how I was like, the booze is gone first.
The booze is gone. I'd fucking leave too.
God damn it.
Dry County, fuck this shit. What is this, Utah?
All right, that says a lot about me today. Let's continue.
So on October 24th of 1929 is what was known as Black Thursday and wouldn't stop until October 29th of the same year, which was known as Black Tuesday. And of course, we can recall what that was, the Great Depression. The Lehigh Valley Coal Company was hit from the Great Depression and decided that they needed to close 5 of the mines that they had operated at the time. All 5 of them were in Centralia. The economy took a massive hit in Centralia, and many people were left jobless, and some eventually were homeless. Still, the residents tried to persist on and worked on doing some bootleg mining or started scavenging what they could out of the mines, such as anthracite, tools, rail cars, tracks, and even taking in some pillars and other equipment. Some of the local competitors tried buying up the mines from the Lehigh Corporation, and some were temporarily reopened, and the town continued to try their best to find a decent means of living and life. However, when the 1950s hit, the town saw a lot of their residents start to leave, dropping the population down 18.9% to just under 2,000 residents. Still, that's a lot of people, kind of condensed into a quarter of a square mile of land. Mm-hmm. But what would happen over the next decade, well into today, is what you would finally see seal the fate of the town and end up with Centralia becoming a ghost town. So, Erin, I'm going to go on a little bit of a story time. Okay.
Ready.
So, I found a video by this guy, which you actually watched. He's an urban explorer named Dan Bell on YouTube, in which he actually traveled to Centralia and looked at one of the remaining structures that was still there. Little did I know that after watching that video and doing a little bit of research on this topic, that I would find out that there's a certain thing that I hold pretty close to my chest that would make me want to research this case even further.
Interesting.
So it's been 20 years since I first played a video game that I hold a very deep spot in my heart. In January of 1999, the video company Konami, go fuck yourself Konami, released a game that was in development for about 3 years. So in 1996, the company Capcom came out with one of the first games of its kind named Resident Evil. You've heard of that.
I have.
Everyone knows what Resident Evil is, whether it's through the lore, the games, or even the piss-poor movies.
Great, what are you talking about?
The fucking movies sucked. I love Mila Jovovich, like Fifth Element, love Mila. Those fucking...
She couldn't save him.
Those movies sucked. And now they're rebooting the whole fucking series.
Why, though?
I don't know. Because Hollywood ran out of ideas.
I think so, and it's very upsetting.
You should talk to Dustin, have him do a fucking Resident Evil movie. We could actually do some fun with it.
That'd be great.
Ask him if he's looking for... I'd make a great zombie because I have, like, very little teeth. I look all disheveled.
It's a good look. I like it.
Yeah. So that game received some critical acclaim as one of the scariest games that had come out at the time, and the puzzle-solving aspects of the game made it that much more addictive. Well, Konami, go fuck yourself, had decided that they wanted to create themselves a spooky game and try to get on the survival horror bandwagon, and created a team of designers of some, kind of like failed projects, and put them on a mission to create their own survival horror game. This team would be known as Team Silent. They developed less of an action-oriented horror game where you play as a cop trying to kill zombies, and one that's more of a psychological adventure where you play as kind of an ordinary man who finds himself in an extraordinary situation. You play as a man named Harry Mason who travels to a town with his adopted daughter named Cheryl until he finds himself driving down a dark road and sees a figure in the way, swerves to miss her, and ends up crashing his fucking car. When he comes to, he finds that Cheryl, his daughter, is missing, and a thick looming fog has settled in the area. When attempting to locate his daughter, he finds himself inside of this town, but things aren't as they always seem. He sees a small girl, and she runs away, but he follows her closely behind, asking if she had seen his daughter. Harry then walks down a dark alleyway, and the surfaces become covered in blood, and a figure is crucified on a barbed wire fence.
Not blurred.
It's blurred. It's all the blurred. And then he starts becoming attacked by all these small children with knives. Just as you do.
Like you do, yeah.
Like you do,
fine.
yeah. Ultimately, then you kind of die in the first part, but then you come to and wake up in a diner and meet an officer named Sybil Bennett. Now, I'm not going to go too far into the game because there's multiple people in the game such as Sybil, Harry, Cheryl, a cult leader named Dahlia, a nurse named Lisa, and a doppelganger of his daughter named Alessa. But the one character that I remember the most in this entire game was the town. Mm-hmm. The town of Silent Hill. Of course, there are many games in the series, including a couple of movies and some really crappy remasters of the second and third games of the series, fuck Konami. But in 2006, when the first Silent Hill movie came out, it was said that Roger Avery, writer of the movie, was inspired by Centralia for some sort of art direction with the movie itself. So if you watch the first movie, you'll actually see a little girl named Alessa in the movie, who's accompanied by that nurse named Lisa, who bleeds out of her eyes. But you'll notice one part of the movie where they talked about the mine fires that still burn to this day underground. Now, I really wanted something to happen, so here's my little tangent. As I said before, fuck Konami. Konami, as a company, fucking sucks.
For the record.
Yes. They were going to release a new game after putting out a demo back in 2015 called PT, which was kind of a psychological mindfuck, which I'm a big fan of psychological mindfuck games. But at the end of the demo, you see a man walking down a street, and it says that the game is directed by Metal Gear Solid creator Hideo Kojima, also co-directed by Pan's Labyrinth and one of your favorite directors, Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah, Daddy del Toro.
And then the figure that's walking down the street turns around, and it would be the star of the game, which was The Walking Dead and Boondock Saints actor Norman Reedus. The name of the game? Silent Hills. Of course, Konami would fuck this up and fire Hideo Kojima from the company, but hey, at least he still created that Death Stranding game that came out this month, and it still has Guillermo del Toro and Norman Reedus in it, but I don't believe we're ever going to get another good Silent Hill game ever again. And with del Toro being, like, how his creatures are, having him do, like, the creature designs of that game would be fucking amazing.
It would have been, like, the penultimate version of it. Like, it would have been...
like this...
The Holy Grail.
if they never came out with a Silent Hill game like back in 1999 and they wanted to create one, they would be hard pressed to find the ability to make one better than that. Sure. Especially with Del Toro, like his monster creation is so fucking good.
Right. And they hit you in a place too, like it's often like there's a childlike essence that some of his creatures have, where that makes them extra scary, I think. Yeah. Because it connects with you on a weird level. You're like, wow, I feel like a small child being very upset at that thing, whatever that thing is. I don't like it. Like,
that thing sucks. That thing sucks.
Get away from me.
But yeah, so Silent Hill is a little bit inspired by Centralia, which I think is pretty goddamn cool. Awesome. Like, but how and why did this town become so desolate and vacant? And this is the whole crux of Centralia. On May 27th of 1962, sanitation and fire workers had taken a large amount of trash into an abandoned cave that they made to be a makeshift landfill to set fire to, as there was no waste management company in the area since the town was so small. Now apparently they had done this so many times that the earth that surrounded the inner walls of the cave had started crumbling inward and downward and giving way. The city council had stated that they were supposed to put in clay barriers in between the landfill and what could be open caverns, but they failed to do so, and on that day they also didn't extinguish the flames as much as they should have, and the ground caved downward into an anthracite vein that they hadn't accounted for.
That's horrifying.
Yep. Now, I did mention how anthracite is a very compressed type of coal, and it burns for a very long time. The temperature of anthracite can reach upwards of 900 degrees Fahrenheit and emits a blue flame, but will also burn red like most coal types when it's embering. Once you get anthracite burning, it's extremely hard to put out. Of course, they kept the fire under wraps as not to worry the residents, but tension started rising when they found that it wasn't just a single anthracite vein that ignited, but there was an entire labyrinth of coal and anthracite that the fire was soon spreading to. The single vein that was ignited was 8 miles long, and the entire area was more than 9 square miles that was already on fire or soon to be. Depths of the fires were as deep as 100 meters below the Earth's surface, and there was almost nothing they could do to stop it. We didn't start the fire.
Oh my god. It was always burning since the wheels were turning.
You knew more about the song than I do.
That's all. Those are the verses.
Yeah, that's it.
I don't know the rest of it.
Oh god. So they get to work trying to find ways to extinguish the flames. In the documentary called The Town That Was, in which was produced in 2007, said that the fire could have been put out 2 weeks after it had started and could have been done for only around $1,000. That's it. Just $1,000. But here we are, still talking about this fucking mine fire to this day. That would be an issue that would plague the citizens of Centralia for the rest of their time. Money. Pretty much any attempts, whether it been by digging trenches, using a non-combustible fire retardant like fly ash, or even trying to douse the flames, would ultimately be seen as unsuccessful at trying to even make the smallest dent in the fire that was raging below their homes.
Can you imagine?
No, I can't.
Like knowing that was happening, sitting there in your living room, just like hanging out, like reading the paper.
Hey, look, Cheers is on. Don't forget, there's also a fire underneath my fucking feet.
Yep.
Yep.
Right there.
I wonder if it would actually help them cut down on their electric bills, on their heat bill in this wintertime, though.
Perhaps. It would eliminate those like cold mornings where your feet would be freezing.
Yeah. It's
right?
like everybody has heated flooring.
Oh, God, that's terrible.
Well, shit, in that Dan Bell documentary that we watched, where he's in Centralia, like, they had coal-burning furnaces in their houses.
That's true.
Like,
yeah.
Do we just get rid of them now?
Yeah, sure. Why not? There's more space in the basement.
Hell yeah.
You could have a party down there. It's good.
There's more room for activities.
Yes.
Yes. So as time went on, it was said that you could see the hills glow at night, whether it would be red from the flames burning beneath the ground or blue from the methane and sulfur dioxide coming up through the Earth's surface. In the documentary, you can see one of the town's remaining citizens named John Lakaitis speaking up to the documentary crew, and the hills behind him are bellowing with smoke. That's 45 years after the fire had initially started. Needless to say, it hasn't slowed down by any means, even up until that point. So, what happened with the citizens? Well, needless to say, any mining efforts or fringe bootleg mining efforts were completely halted. It's almost like pouring out a gallon of gasoline on an incline with rocks. You can watch as the fluid runs down into specific areas, but you never know what will and won't catch fire. With this labyrinth maze of these caves, you couldn't head down there and try to mine out any kind of ore, or because beneath it, there could be burning coal, not to mention with the carbon monoxide gases and methane gases. Anyone going down there to try to fetch a quick buck could almost certainly find themselves in an early grave, either by smoke and gas inhalation or by collapsing walls. That's another thing. Remember how I said that people were taking structures out of the mines when the Lehigh Coal Factory closed the mines? A lot of those coal mines collapsed on themselves, making it nearly impossible to get in front of some of the fires and prevent further burnings. Now, for the non-mining citizens, things were very uncertain. And I actually found some archived news footage that I found courtesy of CNBC, where there was a city council meeting in which they had told the concerned citizens of Centralia that the fire was almost impossible to be put out by any means. In this specific meeting, the citizens were told by the council, as well as government representatives that they were at the meeting with, that it was unsafe for them to continue residing in the town that they had once called home. But what they had called home was soon turning into a fucking powder keg. In 1979, the fire had spread even more rapidly and was coming closer to the Earth's surface. Sinkholes started forming in the area, and it was treacherous for people to even walk among their backyards, due to the surface being dried out and consumed by the smoke and flames. There was even a time when the then mayor went to a local gas station and inserted a dipstick into the underground gas tank to see how much gasoline was inside of it, but when he pulled out the dipstick, he found that the stick was eerily warm to the touch. He then took a thermometer, tied it to a piece of string, and relayed it down into the gasoline. When he pulled it back out, he found that the gasoline that was inside of the tank had reached a staggering 172 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, just for record, it's unsafe to store gasoline in any sort of material that can reach 125 degrees Fahrenheit. Considering the coal was still burning, it was practically a tragedy waiting to happen. If not for the emissions, the fumes, the methane, or the possibility of a gas station exploding, there were other factors that would soon find the residents in the public's eye. Now, carbon monoxide detectors were paid for by the EPA, and they were put in most of the houses as to check on the poisonous gases in the area, but to make sure that people were safe. But some of the detectors weren't working properly, or there was such a shortage of them that they had to borrow each other's to check the levels in their houses. And some people, which this is kind of morbid, some people had even resorted to the old method of getting canaries and bringing them down into the coal mines. That's something that you can even see in the Silent Hill movie. The theory is that there's dangerous gases in the area. Coal miners would bring in a canary in a cage down into the shafts with them, and if the gases got too bad, it would kill the canary and act as a precaution for the miners to get out of the area. So residents started resorting to that tactic in their very own homes.
That's dedication to be like, okay, well, let's stay here still, even though
right. The fact that you're like, hey, we have to get a canary to make sure that we're not going to die.
I mean, but we want to stay here though.
Yeah, we want to be here.
And that was kind of interesting in the documentary that we watched. That John Lakaitis gentleman was. First of all, the documentary was very like, it showed the human side of the residents and the whole event. And
so many coasters.
So we'll hang on to that thought, guys. This is important.
Yes.
But no, watching that guy talk about Lakaitis. I'm so sorry. I keep mispronouncing his name. I want to make him more Greek than what he is.
Right.
I think is what's happening. Anyway, I was astounded he's basically like leading you through the town and showing you where stuff used to be and just reliving his memories there, growing up as a child. And every time he would like show you a spot, and relive the memory, you could see him reliving it, and like the life would slowly drain out of his face because he realized that he would never it wasn't there anymore.
Yeah. And
it was so sad.
Yeah.
It was like, it's not something that I thought about until I watched the documentary. I was like, wow, that's rough. Yeah. It was rough to see.
I mean, and you can see like the life and the vividness and like talking about the gas station and like, down here, he's like, that's the general store we would go to all the time.
He would start so excited.
Yep. And then it's almost like,
and then like a switch flipped and it's just all color like just gone.
Yeah.
And it was just so upsetting.
Yeah, it's sad.
I can't believe they were able to capture that. That was rough.
Yeah.
But coasters though.
Yeah. There's one guy in that. If you watch that documentary, like it's the town that was. It's really good. But there's this one dude that's got so many fucking coasters.
And it's like the focal point behind him. That's what's really weird is that they have it like in focus. They're like, we want you to see his collection of 17 coasters in one holder. And I suppose he could be like in a boardroom or something where there are a lot of people, you know, that like a big table where people sit or whatever. But at the same time, I'm just like, that's a lot of coasters in one area.
That's a lot of fucking coasters. Yeah. Well, there's also another part of that documentary that was they actually had this guy in there who's involved in this. So in 1981, a 12-year-old boy by the name of Todd Dombowski was running around his backyard when he stopped dead in his tracks after falling into a 4-foot-wide sinkhole that fell beneath his feet. The sinkhole itself went down roughly 150 feet onto smoldering coal. The fire had heated the Earth's surface so much that it crumbled beneath his feet, but luckily he was able to grab onto a root from a tree while his cousin went for help. In the documentary, you heard a resident say that he was lucky he was wearing a blaze orange hunting hat that he was easily spotted and brought back to the surface. Had he not had his cousin's help or the hat on, he surely would have fallen down into the hole and burned to death. You can actually see Todd and just reliving that horrifying tale. So after that, the public was more aware of this once pretty close secret about the town that was sitting right above the surface of hell. That's when the federal government had stepped in with the idea of eminent domain. In 1983, the U.S. Congress had decided to allocate roughly $42 million in relief efforts to relocate residents to the local townships as well as businesses, considering the government's attempt at using fly ash and creating barricades had proved unsuccessful. The residents were at a loss, their town was burning, and the once beautiful streets were now littered with pipes that reached deep into the ground to help release gas tensions and let the coal beds breathe. So, what was there to do? Do you leave your homestead? Do you leave your livelihood and your memories behind? What happens to your property after that? What would you do?
Right.
Trees were dying from the carbon dioxide and the extended heats. The once beautiful green grass and flourishing trees were now becoming ashen, barren, almost kind of like a petrified landscape of a once beautiful township. People were packing up, moving out, and getting away from this fire and uncertain future. There were roughly 1,017 people still living in Centralia, and nearly 1,000 people had taken up the government's offer to be relocated out of town. Of their houses and structures, 500 of them were claimed by the government and demolished down to rubble. In the documentary, John Lokitis had stated that the government would wait for a full city block to be vacated and then bring in a bulldozer and demolish everything that was on that block, leaving nothing but rubble and soon to be just dirt. Memory stripped from where they once stood.
Just all that emptiness, that vast emptiness, just upsetting to even think about. I can't imagine living there.
Yeah, lost memories. Could you imagine if something like that happened, like in Dayton?
No, I was just thinking the same thing. I was like, I love Dayton. That would be heartbreaking.
Yeah, like what if?
Actually,
I'm trying to think. Good.
I feel like some people who have lived here for a while had witnessed that for a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, back in, like the 80s and stuff, when Dayton wasn't doing so well.
Yeah.
Definitely like the old, because my dad had lived here all of his life, and he was talking about, really growing up, I heard him talk about going to Reich's, the department store downtown. But my dad used to talk about how going downtown and going to the Reich's department store and walking around and all the Christmas displays and everything in the windows, and how popular it was to just like get dressed up and go downtown.
Oh yeah.
And then it stopped doing we stopped doing that when was NCR, National Cash Register, left.
Oh, see, I didn't.
Yeah.
I'm
because Dayton became sort of a little bit desolate.
Yeah.
After that happened.
You notice with Dayton a lot of the. I mean, you look at downtown, like everything is moving outward.
Right.
Like a lot of the companies are moving outward. There's only like a few really tall businesses, but like, you know, Beaver Creek is flourishing and Austin Landing is flourishing.
Well, and we're rebuilding downtown quite a bit. I mean, it looks really good now, but that's only been, you know, in the past maybe 10 or 15 years or so, I think.
Right.
So it's looking good now, and, you know, I think there's a lot of pride right now, but for a while it was rough.
Yeah. I mean, especially when the flood happened.
Yeah.
And the GM plant closing too. I think that took a massive toll on Dayton as well.
So, I don't know why we started talking about that.
It's okay. No.
What were we talking about?
Oh, we're talking about like memories.
Yes, thank you. But yeah, I mean, like I was talking about with my mom earlier with Detroit, and my dad had something similar with Dayton. So it can get sort of it's a lot of sentimental value in a place that you live. Yeah, you know, it's important to people.
But then the government telling you that you got to get the fuck out. Yeah.
There's something extra hurtful about that.
There's imminent danger though. So it's like, it's not like them just being like, hey, we're just going to close down Dayton. You fuckers get out of here.
Right.
Like, well, during 1990 census, the population had dropped 93.8%, all the way down to only 63 residents. The reason being that people were still living in denial about the fires and the dangers that they posed on their health and homes. Some of the residents were just elderly, and some just wanted to live out the rest of their lives in their homes and be buried in the local cemetery not far from the landfill site. As John Lakaitis had said in the documentary, people will leave Centralia, but sooner or later, they always make it back. And that was talking about how the residents who once lived in Centralia are still being buried out on the land. And John, at the time of the documentary, was still grave tending. He was cutting the grass and still just holding on to the memories that he had of that town. Right. I can't recommend that documentary enough to anybody who is interested in it. It's a fantastic piece, and you see a lot of John's self-struggle with trying to decide if he's doing the right thing or not. But a little update to that is that in 2000, the population had dropped to just 21 people. Then, in 2010, the population dropped to just 10 people, with John included, and Mayor Lamar Mervine passing away on January 1st of 2010. But later in 2010, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania had evicted John Lakaitis Jr. from Centralia, leaving behind his home that was left to him from his deceased father, and soon the rest of the residents will most likely live out the rest of their lives on the land. But what stands in Centralia today?
I don't know, but I keep getting calls from the area code that Centralia is in.
What? Yeah, I remember you telling me that. You're like, hey, this area code is the Centralia area code.
Literally, the day that I started reading about it, I got a call from a Pennsylvania number, and it was the area code where Centralia is. And I was like,
Big Brother's fucking watching.
Actually, what it is the bill collector, which is way scarier than any sort of like demon or ghost or hellfire come to life.
You know what you should do the next time they call you? Just be like, hey, I actually live over here in Centralia. I live in this hole. Just jump down. You'll get your money.
Hey!
And that's how we get rid of bill collectors.
Yeah.
Tell them that.
Violence.
Well, when it comes to Centralia, I mean, there's a few houses that are still up. You can even see Dan Bell walking into one of them in the little urban exploration thing he posted.
Yeah, and there's still stuff in there. Like, it's really strange.
Yeah. The one thing that you'll notice about those houses, though, is that they have these brick structures on the side of them. And in the documentary, John was actually talking about how people thought those were chimney stacks, but no, it's considering that a lot of the houses in the area were duplexes since so many people lived in such a small area. When people would move out of the area, they would demolish that part of the house and they would put up some new siding and then add the brick structures to the building to help retain the weight as there was no building to the side of it anymore. A few of the houses still remain. The highway that once led people through Centralia is now unable to be traveled on, and there is a huge amount of graffiti on the blacktop, and the road itself has buckled and crumbled due to the heat. However, the Ukrainian Catholic Church still resides and is still in use to this day by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, as it was deemed that the church was built on stone and there was practically no way for the church to be altered or hurt by the fires that burned beneath it. The mineral rights of the anthracite now belong to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and maybe one day if the fires go out, they might be able to acquire some of those coal sources. But as we all know, coal mining is a dying industry, and even the top 3 coal companies in the United States have now filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protections. Other than that, Centralia is practically a ghost town, and there is nothing left of this once prosperous mining town. And that's Centralia, Pennsylvania for you. I'm glad that I kind of brought it up to you, and I'm glad you could join me on this episode. I hope that sometime, maybe in the spring, I'll be able to head up there. If you want to travel with, you're more than welcome to.
You're like willing it. You're like, you're more than likely to.
You're more than likely.
It's gonna happen.
You're more than welcome to.
I would love to do a follow-up exploration episode.
Oh, I love doing urban exploration.
Yeah, I've never actually done it, I don't think.
I have. Down in Louisville, there is the old ice factory that they had down there, and I may or may not have gone through a fence.
I was going to say, so you weren't guided.
No.
So that doesn't count. Like you have to, if you're guided, does that count as urban exploration?
Urban exploration is going into abandoned buildings and stuff.
Okay. Like old places where I was guided. I was like a guided tour, but
oh yeah, no, yeah. I like going rogue.
That's good.
That's how you get yourself a trespassing charge.
Yes. What?
Haven't gotten one yet.
Well, there's always time. There's still time.
Yeah.
It's fine. You're young.
Well, Erin, I didn't want to brag too much about it, but apparently Dustin Mills is doing a Kickstarter for that fucking movie that I still have yet to see, Slaughterhouse Slumber Party. But I'm going to put a link to the Kickstarter in the description of this episode. That way, if you would like to get yourself a copy of that movie and help fund it so it can get to some screenings, touring, all that stuff, because you're very proud of it, and I know Haley was very proud of it, and Dustin is very proud of it. So you should check out that Kickstarter. But Erin, I thank you for being on this episode with me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
I had a great time.
Thank you for having an interest in it.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Absolutely.
My nonsense.
Yes. And if you enjoyed this episode, if you would please, you can go to Apple Podcasts, if you use that as your podcatcher, and leave me a 5-star review for me, or just say, hey, Erin's really cool. Here's 5 stars, because 5-star reviews are awesome. If you'd like to follow Murder and Such on social media, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Murder and Such. Erin, if people like to follow you, would you like to give out your social media stuffs?
Sure. So I am on Facebook at Erin R. Ryan. And then my Instagram is ERR. And I think that's it. That's all. That's really the main 2 that I use.
Fantastic. So yeah. Erin R. Ryan on Facebook, or E. Ryan ERR on Instagram.
Yep.
Awesome. If you'd like to follow me, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, the PlayStation Network, and Snapchat at Huntor27. But again, I thank you guys for being with me this episode. I thank Erin for her lovely voice and being the first person as a guest on Murder and Such in so very long.
Anytime.
So come back sometime soon.
I'll be here.
All right. But until next time, we will talk to you soon. Okay, bye.
Bye.